Hey there, it's Mattea. Thanks for taking the time to listen to Bookends today. Before we get into today's show, I have a little suggestion for you. If you've been enjoying our show, it would be a huge help for us, and I think also for you, to follow us on your favorite podcast app, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, whatever app you use to listen. This will ultimately help us make more Bookends episodes and connect you with more of your favorite authors. I hope you enjoyed today's show. Thanks so much for listening. Hey there, I'm Mattea Roach. Welcome to Bookends. When I first heard the title of Emma Knight's novel, The Life Cycle of the Common Octopus, I was intrigued. I thought it might be something in the vein of My Octopus Teacher or Remarkably Bright Creatures, a documentary and a book, respectively, that look at relationships between humans and actual octopuses. So I was somewhat surprised to learn that The Life Cycle of the Common Octopus actually doesn't deal with marine life at all. It follows two Canadian students finding their way at the University of Edinburgh in the year 2006. It's a story about friendship, family secrets, and what it means to be a mother. And Emma drew inspiration from her own relationships with her two young daughters. The Life Cycle of the Common Octopus is Emma Knight's debut novel, and it was the January pick for Jenna Bush Hager's Today Show book club, Read with Jenna. Emma joined me in our studio in Toronto for this conversation. Hi, Emma. Welcome to Bookends.
Hi. Thank you, Mattea.
Now, like your main character, Penn, in The Life Cycle of the Common Octopus, you also went to the University of Edinburgh as a Canadian international student. And the first thing that came to mind when I read this was, why did you choose to study there? Because I've been to Edinburgh. It's a very lovely city. The weather is kind of horrible, and it's a big move to go abroad as a young student.
It's a good question. And I got that question a lot, including from the customs officers regularly at Heathrow Airport, especially once they found out that I was studying French and Spanish literature in Scotland. For me, it was the idea of adventure that attracted me, and the moodiness of the city of Edinburgh, its beauty, its architectural gloriousness, combined with that weather is actually not something that I react against. There's a kind of coziness to those moody skies that appeals to me.
I say the weather, and I think really for me is how shockingly dark it gets very early in the evening. The weather is it's very coastal, and so there is something kind of comforting and cozy about it. In the acknowledgments of your book, you also thank your friends that you met at university for making university worth writing about, and everyone who said or did something to or near me in Edinburgh. Are there any particular moments from your own university experience that helped shape the story that you tell in The Life Cycle of the Common Octopus?
I think the British sense of humor permeates the story. There's a specific kind of dry, self-deprecating, fanfare-free sense of humor that is as much a part of the atmosphere as that kind of wet air of Scotland and the wool sweaters that are constantly a little bit damp. And that sense of humor and the importance that's put on chat. You know, somebody having good chat. Like when a seating arrangement is done, you put somebody with good chat next to, somebody who might require somebody with good chat. And I think there's something really wonderful about that as a priority, as something that people value.
Mm-hmm. You can tell amongst the characters in the novel, humor is something that they really value. There were a lot of lines that made me laugh out loud. And also there's just this specificity to the college experience of what your priorities are. There was one line in the novel where you talk about when the weather kind of lets up a little bit for the first time in the spring and everybody just wants to be outside in the quad, ignoring the fact that they have exams coming up soon. That was exactly my experience in Toronto at university. There would be a day where everyone decided, today we drink beer outside and we forget about all our papers. I loved getting kind of thrown back into that world. But there's a lot going on in the life cycle of the Common Octopus that isn't just sort of campus novel shenanigans. You know, as I mentioned in the introduction, Pen, your main character, is excited to go study, in her case, English and French at university and have some of these quintessential university experiences. She's also haunted by her parents' divorce and specifically feels like they're hiding something from her. What is it that makes her feel that there's some sort of secret about her parents' relationship that she might want to uncover?
It is not, it's a kind of absence. I'd say it's less of a presence and more of an absence that she grows up with. This gap in her knowledge that when she does try to press on that area, she can see the pained look on her parents' faces, and she can understand by the quality of their silence that this is not a place that they would like to have her probe. And I was very interested while writing this novel about the Jungian concept of individuation. So the idea that throughout our lives, you know, you're not born a full human being. You spend your whole life becoming one, essentially. And that figuring out who you are specifically as an individual does require some understanding of where you come from. And in the case of Pen, she really wants to understand what it was about love that resulted in so much pain for her parents. She, as an optimistic young person and somebody who loves reading, especially kind of 19th century novels, romance is appealing to her. She doesn't believe in it. Her practical experience is that marriage does not lead to forever companionship and, you know, a balm for the soul, etc. And she kind of wants to understand that gap and know in her own journey whether to be optimistic, what to look for, if love should be a part of that, and so on.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up this idea of individuation, because that was the process that I really saw unfolding in this novel with Pen and with a lot of her friends as well, who are all, you know, around the age of 18. They're growing into their adulthood. A lot of them are away from home. It's a matter of kind of understanding where they come from, knowing what made them into the people that they are now, but also individuation can be about separation from the parents and the family and finding out, you know, how much of my personality am I born into and just kind of like doomed to carry? How many of my parents' patterns am I doomed to repeat? Versus, you know, how am I different from them? Can I make different choices that maybe lead to different outcomes? Can love be real for me in the case of Pen, right? So when Pen gets to Edinburgh, she basically she specifically goes to Edinburgh because she feels like this location in particular is going to be an important part of this process of individuation. And she reaches out to her father's estranged best friend from university, who's this acclaimed thriller writer named Lord Lennox. And Lord Lennox invites Pen to spend the weekend at this estate in the Scottish countryside. Can you describe a little bit the Lennox family and what Pen finds when she goes to this estate?
So, yes, Edinburgh is considered one of the most haunted cities in Europe, if not the world. And I liked it partially for that reason as a setting for this quest to unearth the skeletons in her parents' closets. And she does decide to start with this estranged friend of her dad's called Lord Lennox, as you said, because throughout her childhood she's asked her dad specific questions, and they've continuously led her to this name, this kind of mysterious figure. So she writes him a letter, care of his literary agent, not really expecting a response. And when he writes back a few days later, inviting her to come spend the weekend, she is astonished, to say the least, and of course immediately packs her bags and heads to Waverley train station. And she's picked up by a man called Hector, who drives her to what is essentially a castle. Nobody really wants to use that word. It's a little bit uncomfortable, but it is this ancestral estate, and she encounters this family that seems to her to embody a kind of perfection. And by that I mean that she finds a marriage that seems to be working. Lord Lennox's wife, Christina, Lady Lennox, becomes relatively quickly someone Pen looks up to and begins to try to model parts of her future adult self on. partially because she's so warm and generous, but also because she seems happy in the life that she's made for herself with her beloved husband. And then, of course, we encounter the handsome son, Sasha Lennox. And she slowly, over the course of getting to know this family, not only tugs at the thread of her own family secret and kind of unravels more than she bargained for, but she also sees past her own initial impression of the Lennox family and lets them become fully human in her own eyes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was such a rich kind of unfolding of multiple secrets as she gets further and further into the lore of the Lennox family. And one of the things that I think really drives her engagement with them is indeed this handsome son, Sasha, right? Where this is kind of Penn's first truly debilitating crush, like one that regardless of what happens later on in her life, she's probably going to remember this guy forever is the vibe that I'm getting because he's so impactful. How does her skepticism that she gets from seeing her parents' marriage fail, seeing that her best friend from home, Alice, also had parents who were in this kind of dysfunctional relationship, how does all of that background impact her as she's also experiencing this full force of being 18 and being so infatuated with someone? He's also a couple years older, which is the drama.
Absolutely, that age gap. And I like how you put it, a debilitating crush, her first debilitating crush, because I do remember crushes hitting me like that. Sure, it's ostensibly a good thing, but it's also horrible. It's kind of excruciating. And so if you add to that all the insecurity of being 18 and then you add on top of that the layer of, I don't even know if I believe in this as a worthwhile thing to kind of invest my time, energy, and hope in, you end up with someone who is not necessarily living in the moment or in her body or in, all the things you're supposed to live in when you're 18 and have a crush. And instead, she's kind of analyzing herself from above constantly and probing, and just as she was with her parents, but kind of poking at everything about their interaction. And she ends up finding a kind of an epistolary rhythm with him that is much more comfortable. She goes back to Edinburgh and because it's 2006, they're sending each other instant messages. And she's able to kind of get the body out of the way and just connect with him on a more mental level.
I loved that epistolary vibe. And the specificity of it being, I assume, MSN Messenger, AOL Messenger, or early email platforms, as opposed to the greater immediacy that people of that age have now when it's Instagram DMs or Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp or whatever. What was it like for you? I'm assuming that you maybe were in college at around the same time as when this book is set. What was it like for you going back into that mode of this is how people communicate and this is what it feels like to engage with somebody in this way?
Yes, I was in university at the same time. And the reason I chose this exact year was because it was the year before the iPhone came out. The first iPhone came out in 2007. And there were people with BlackBerries, but not very many. Most people, if they wanted to communicate with their epistolary crush and didn't want to resort to the very short text message, limitations, would do so by Ethernet cable at a clunky laptop in their dorm room and or, by the landline that was next to it. And that I enjoyed not having Penn and Sasha even pick up the phone until quite far into their months-long conversation, because I think there's the greater distance of the written word is something that I, as a younger person, appreciated. And I think you're absolutely right that when it's in your pocket and there's that sense of a required response now, whereas Penn and Sasha are fitting each other, they're fitting the conversation into their day. They've kind of memorized each other's internet habits, and they know that at a specific time of day, maybe they'll find each other online. And the sort of the excitement of that and the fact that it does let you live the rest of your life, there's not that kind of codependency that we see with the phone. It's a specific time. It's not all day. And you just kind of give in to the pleasure of it.
I hear from people sometimes, my age and a bit younger, who are in relationships where there's often, or even in close friendships, there is like frustration that a certain person is not available by text 24 hours of the day. And sometimes it's like, I'm writing an exam, I'm at work, and people are like, how dare you not find 5 minutes to answer a text? It's a little bit oppressive, I think, compared to the rhythms that you see in this book.
It is oppressive. I don't think you can be truly free if you're constantly answerable to anybody who has a question for you at that moment. And in 2006, Penn could be truly free. And to go back to your earlier question, why Edinburgh, the distance was real distance back then, even though compared to previous generations, there still was a lot more connectivity and, phone calls were not so expensive the way they would have been in the 70s or even the 80s or 90s. You could still communicate with family back home relatively inexpensively, but you could also for many, many hours of the day not be answerable to anybody. And that I remember distinctly that feeling of nobody knows where I am right now. I'm only 17 and nobody knows where I am, and how freeing that was.
I want to dive back into, we're talking about Penn being free in certain ways, but also you mentioned she has this very analytical way of living her life where she's not always having pure embodied experiences of that 17, 18-year-old freedom. She's thinking perhaps a little bit too much sometimes about everything she's doing. But she also has this best friend, Alice, who goes to university in Edinburgh with her, that they've known each other for a decade, which is a massive amount of time at that age. And Alice has a very different vibe to Penn. What's their dynamic like, and how do they kind of play off of each other?
They are very different. Alice does live more in her body. Alice has more physical confidence, more confidence in general in some ways. She's an aspiring actor, and she, from a young age, has known how to present herself. And she's the type of person who knows which way to face when she's looking at the camera, how to give her best angle, how to deliver. In a scene that I ended up cutting, I had her delivering a little bit of a speech in a tutorial. And she's somebody who can persuasively present an argument because she's been practicing doing that her whole life. And she is brave and wants to experience the freedom of being away from home for the first time with her whole body. And Penn is brave in her own way, but she is very much afraid of that idea. Mm-hmm. And Alice is, they're protective of each other. And they're both aware of the risk of being too protective of each other, which results in them keeping some secrets from each other.
Yeah, it was so interesting seeing these two characters who've known each other for a long time. All of a sudden, they're both in this environment that's unfamiliar. They both are smart enough as young people to be aware that this is possibly a time of great growth and change for both of them. And so although they want to protect each other, they also want to give each other space to grow separately, to maybe make some mistakes. What interested you in writing about a friendship like that and having the friendship be such a big part of the novel at this particular time of change and growth?
I'm very lucky in that I have a very close friend. I have several very close friends, but one in particular with whom I have grown up. And so we have experienced watching one another make mistakes and, allowing it. I also have a sister who's very different from me. And I think these relationships where there's unconditional love, there's mutual respect and admiration, but there's also a knowledge that you're in it for the long game with this person, and you actually hope they're going to change because humans are supposed to change. You sometimes hear about a friendship breakup where somebody is saying to somebody else, "You've changed." And, when you know that somebody is going to be your sister for life, whether biological or not, you expect that they're going to change, and you want to help be a part of allowing them to become their whole self.
Now, I do want to hard pivot and ask about the title, because as I mentioned in the introduction, I see octopus in a title, and I think we're going to get another book that literally deals with the octopus. It's really compelling, and it does come from a line in the book, even though the book is not strictly about the octopus. There's this line later on in your novel where a character uses the octopus as a metaphor for this theme of motherhood that, as you've mentioned, really permeates the life cycle of the common octopus. What sparked the idea to bring this marine creature into your novel as this metaphor?
So that line, again, just came. It wasn't premeditated. When the character said that, the phrase kind of got stuck in my head. And it struck me as you've said, a metaphor for a kind of, I'd say there's a Loch Ness monster that we can torture ourselves with, and that I was torturing myself with pretty actively at the time of writing this novel, which I'd say is this sort of image of the perfect mother, the one who sacrifices everything, including who she wants to be or thought she was going to be, or, all independent ambition and drive and selfhood for her children. And if you've seen My Octopus Teacher, or if you've studied the life cycle of the octopus, it's not a spoiler to say that in the life cycle of the common octopus, and not just the common octopus, many different species of octopus, you do have the female entering senescence after caring for her eggs. And that means that she begins to waste away. She stops feeding herself. She becomes purely alive in order to sustain that next generation's birth, and then she is instantly obsolete. It's also true of the male. It actually happens sooner for the male. But that image of this female character sacrificing everything for her young was something that I couldn't really get out of my head as I was writing this.
You examine motherhood in this novel through a number of different mother-daughter relationships that play out in very different ways. Mothers who are self-sacrificing, as you're describing, but also mothers who really prioritize their own pleasure, their own career, their own kind of maintenance of a sense of self in ways that sometimes other characters don't respond well to, but sometimes, is respected. I would say what I got from your authorial perspective is that the novel didn't feel judgmental about the different ways that people choose to be mothers. And I'm wondering, for yourself as an author and also as a mother, what were you trying to get at by displaying motherhood in all of these different iterations?
I think you've really put your finger on it. It's about that suspension of judgment and understanding that all the different ways there are to be human, there are the same number of ways to be a mother. And that if you're being an authentic version of yourself, that's better, I think, for your children than if you're suppressing a part of yourself. Because to go back to that Jungian, there's individuation, and then there's also this idea that the unlived lives of parents is a burden that children carry forward. And by unlived lives, Jung talked about it was thwarted hopes, it was missed opportunities, it was, all of those things that you could have or might have, had circumstances been different, done in your life. And I'm very conscious of the past generations, specifically of women, that have allowed me to have the freedom that I have, because it is by no means a given for, a young woman to be able to go to university at all. It's only fairly recent that that's allowed. And when I think about the sacrifices that my grandmothers made of their own, sense of self in order to pour all of that love and dedication into the 5 children that one of them had and 6 that the other had, it's just such a different equation from the one that I have had the privilege of growing up with. And the generational progress that has brought us to where we are now is at an interesting place right now. And I think it's important as we move into the future to pause and recognize that there is no such thing as a perfect mother, and that humanity is what matters here.
It's interesting to bring up, the difference between how motherhood was undertaken by your grandmothers and then, how you might undertake it now. The book is actually dedicated to your grandmother, one of your grandmothers, I believe. Can you talk a bit maybe more about her and why you decided to dedicate the book to her?
Yes. So my mom's mom, Shirley, who went through various name changes over the course of her life, but most recently was Shirley Daynard, and she died while I was writing the book. But over the course of my writing it, we talked regularly, and I visited with her regularly, and she would offer her opinion. One, she was thrilled that I was able to write stories because it was something that I think she always would have loved to have done, but certainly did not have the time or the confidence or the education to do. Her family couldn't afford to send her to school past the 8th grade. She grew up in a very rural part of northern Ontario, and she had to board in a town called Thessalon to go to junior high, and high school was out of the question. So she married young and had a lot of children, raised them in Sault Ste. Marie, where it was extremely cold, and did everything by hand, made them clothes by night, was raising 6 children with a husband who worked in Algoma Steel by night, and she worked as many jobs as she possibly could by day, but it wasn't as if she was a career woman. She was doing it so that her kids would have shoes that fit. And her life was just so different from mine. So to be able to talk to her while she was in her 90s and I had small children about this novel that I was writing was amazing. And she thought the title sounded boring. But then she said, "I'm really sorry. I hope that's not discouraging." It's dedicated to her and to the work and love that has resulted in my ability to do this.
That's amazing. And it's such a gift, for her and for you, that she lived into her 90s and was able to see the birth of her great-grandchildren and see the progress that can happen within one family in terms of the opportunities that are available to people, especially to girls and women over the generations. Like, when you're describing her, I think a lot about my mom's mom as well, who similarly grew up very rurally, was a caregiver for her younger siblings from a very early age. Also, I think only went to school up to grade 6 or grade 8 or something like that. And to think about what her life was like and then compare to my mom and then compare to me, it's mind-boggling. You've engaged with the subject of motherhood in some of your nonfiction writing and essays as well before the life cycle of the Common Octopus was released. And you wrote this article in LitHub in 2022 where you talked about how you're glad to see more cultural representation of what you call bad motherhood on screen and in books. And I'm wondering, what do you mean by bad motherhood?
So in that essay, I wrote about, I believe I referred to Elena Ferrante and to possibly Night Bitch.
Yeah.
Which is, and to Ashley Audrain's fantastic The Push. I said bad motherhood in that essay in a kind of, air quotes kind of way, but bad as in working through the crying in the case of The Push. That incredible scene that Ashley Audrain writes of a mother who's writing and her child is awake from a nap and crying, and the mother continues writing. And I'm not saying that that's a good thing to do as a mother, but that as a human being, you can be torn in different directions. And writing about that, because that's a real thing, strikes me as being important. If we're only ever representing the kind of unconditional love and perfect self-erasure version of motherhood, then it makes it seem even more monstrous when a real-life mother experiences rage or frustration or depression or anxiety or any of the normal range of human emotions. And so I like seeing in books, in films, women who don't make it look easy.
Yeah, it's almost you need that representation in order to understand when in real life a woman behaves in a way that seems to not meet the standard of what a good mother is, or seems perhaps difficult to understand. How could she behave that way? You need to have a framework of why these things happen. What it made me think of was there's this psychologist, D.W. Winnicott, who wrote, I believe, in the mid-20th century about the good enough mother. The idea that we have this standard of what a mother should be able to do that doesn't always apply to fathers, because fathers can kind of just be the breadwinner and do some very basic childcare, and that's seen as enough. Obviously, a lot has changed since he was writing about this idea of the good enough mother, that maybe you just need to do okay and make sure your children are provided for and reasonably emotionally supported and not completely drain yourself caring for your child. I feel like that idea has definitely permeated the culture since then. I read about it in Are You My Mother by Alison Bechdel, but I know a lot of other people who've come to it in other ways. That's what I was thinking about while reading your essay, for sure.
I also think that the structures around the women in those works that I mention are lacking. Those women need support that they're not getting. And if that support is not present, then those women are not able to be the mothers that they want to be. I think I also mentioned in that essay how those mothers are, in each of those novels, they're excellent mothers for kind of 99.999% of the time. It's the 0.001% of the time when they freak out that they will forever be judged for. And I think being pushed to that edge has a lot to do with societal forces, with expectations around other caregivers, et cetera. And so it's also about how do we make sure that we recognize how hard it is to be that mother 99.9% of the time, and how do we support these people so that they're not at the edge.
You definitely open up a lot of interesting questions about motherhood, but also some that I would say are more broadly applicable to all parents and to all older family members who are developing relationships with their children, with their nieces and nephews, as those people reach adulthood and start to become their own people. What do you share with your children about your life before they were people? What do you hide? What happens when children start to realize that their parents are also people with flaws and who maybe have done some things in their lives that, the kids don't approve of? I'm wondering how the practice of writing this book influenced how you think about children and parents sharing maybe some of these unsavory details about each other's lives between themselves, and whether you've done any thinking about what you're going to share about yourself with your own children as they grow up.
This is a work in progress for me. My eldest is turning 7 in a couple of weeks, and she's starting to ask the kinds of questions that really make me stop and think how much is too much to share. And then, of course, the existence of a novel, it means that the child, if so inclined, can go read the novel. And even though it's not about my own experience, these are things that I've thought and written down. Even the metaphor of the octopus, being asked by my daughter, what is that all about? That even that is a tricky conversation. And I think the answer that I'm starting to figure out is that your instinct in the moment will tell you, and there is, of course, such a thing as oversharing with a young person, that trying to get some version of your authentic self across is the main thing, and not withholding just for the sake of withholding, and not trying to have it be a kind of societal norm thing. Like, we don't, that's unspeakable, or that's
we don't
taboo.
Talk about that.
Exactly.
Yes.
Like, we don't talk about money, or we don't talk about, there are certain classes of subjects that used to be impolite to talk about. And I don't think that's where the boundary is. It's more letting the child direct the conversation and trying to understand over the course of the conversation what knowledge they're really after, and how you can best answer without overwhelming.
Yeah, or whether there's some sort of insecurity that they might be feeling that's prompting the question. Like the question of the metaphor of the octopus, right? I can imagine a situation where, not to project too much into the future, but I can imagine a situation where maybe one day one of your kids reads it and is like, wait, is this how my mom felt about raising me?
Yeah.
And that's possibly a scary thing.
Yeah, for sure. That would be a scary thing. And I note to self, have that conversation before that day comes. Because, I think having but already it comes up. My daughters regularly ask me out of the blue, do I get to choose whether I have babies, or does it just happen? And even that was a tricky one for me. I had to really think about my answer to that. And I said, I got to choose, and in this country at this time, you get to choose, and my plan is for you to get to choose. But not everyone does, and throughout history, not everyone has. And I think that's something that they can know.
Well, Emma, good luck to you as you navigate all of the thorny questions that I'm sure, because kids love to poke and prod, I'm sure your kids are going to be smart, are going to have lots of wonders about the world, and you're going to have to navigate many more conversations such as that one. Best of luck to you with that, and thank you so much for joining me today. It's been so wonderful to chat with you.
Thank you so much for having me, Mattea.
That was Emma Knight, author of The Life Cycle of the Common Octopus. This episode was produced by Talia Cleot with help from Ailey Yamamoto. Our senior producer is Jacqueline Kirk, and our executive producer is Aaron Balser. Big thanks to our audio tech, Aronde Williams, and the rest of the CBC Books team. I'm Mattea Roach, and this is Bookends. You can tune in on Sundays and Wednesdays on CBC Radio, or follow the show on the podcast app of your choice. You can also come hang out with us on TikTok and Instagram at CBC Books. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Because when the book ends, the conversation begins.